I was born into a family that smiled for photos, but whispered secrets behind closed doors. And for a long time, I believed those smiles were real. My name is Johnson, and this is not just my story. It's the story of how betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people who raised you. I didn't grow up poor. I didn't grow up rich either. But what I grew up with was supposed to matter more than money. Family. At least that's what they told me. I was the youngest son, the quiet one, the kid who listened more than he spoke. While others argued, I stayed silent. While others demanded attention, I waited. And maybe that's where it all began, because when you stay silent too long, people start believing you don't matter. Growing up, I watched how love was divided in my house. My older cousins were praised, my uncles were respected. My father's voice mattered only when it agreed with the rest. And me? I was the background noise. But I didn't know that back then I thought this was normal. I thought families were just complicated. Every dinner felt like a performance, everyone playing their role, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, praising achievements that weren't earned. And still, I trusted them. Because when you're a boy, you believe family will always protect you. I believed them when they said, "Stay patient, Johnson. Your time will come. Family always takes care of its own." I didn't know those words were a trap. School was my escape. Books didn't judge me. Numbers didn't compare me to others. I learned to succeed quietly. I didn't brag. I didn't complain. I just kept moving forward. But success has a strange effect on people, especially when they never expected it from you. The first time I felt something was wrong was the day my name was left out. There was a family meeting, big decisions, money discussions, plans for the future. Everyone was there, except me. I was told later it wasn't important, but something in my chest told me otherwise. That was the first crack. I ignored it, because betrayal doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives smiling. And I was still a boy who believed smiles. By the time I turned 18, I thought I'd finally earned my place. Good grades, no trouble, always respectful. I believed effort would protect me. I was wrong. That year, an opportunity came, a family-backed business project, something that could change lives. I worked on it day and night, ideas, planning, numbers. I gave everything I had. And for the first time, they noticed. They praised me, encouraged me, made me believe I mattered. That was the most dangerous part, because betrayal works best when you feel safe. The final decision day came. I walked into that room with hope. I walked out with nothing. They gave the opportunity to someone else, someone less prepared, someone louder, someone closer to the inner circle. They told me I should be proud, that family unity mattered more than fairness. That's when I understood something painful. I wasn't family to them. I was useful until I wasn't. What hurt wasn't losing the opportunity. It was the way they explained it, with calm voices, with fake concern, with smiles that said, "Accept it." That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed every conversation, every promise, and slowly the truth formed. They never planned to choose me. I was the backup plan. The safe worker, the silent support, not the winner. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was polite, and polite betrayal cuts deeper. I stopped arguing, I stopped explaining, I started watching. Because when someone shows you who they are, the smartest move is to believe them. After that day, something inside me changed. Not anger, not yet, clarity. I realized my silence wasn't weakness. It was invisibility, and invisibility can be powerful. I stayed close. I smiled. I listened. While they underestimated me, I learned everything. I learned who controlled what, who trusted who lied the most. They thought I had accepted my place. They were wrong. I built myself quietly. Education, skills, connections. I stopped seeking approval. I started building leverage. And here's the truth. No one tells you. Revenge doesn't begin with anger. It begins with patience. Years passed. They celebrated successes built on my ideas. They spoke my name less and less, and I let them, because the less they saw me, the more freedom I had. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted something deeper. I wanted the truth to speak for itself, and one day, it would. They had no idea. The boy they dismissed was becoming the man who would expose everything. Revenge doesn't start with noise. It starts with quiet decisions no one notices. By the time they thought my story was over, mine was just beginning. I didn't leave the family. That would have been too easy, too obvious. Instead, I stayed close enough to watch them relax. People are most careless when they think they've already won. They saw me as the boy who accepted defeat, the one who learned his place, the one who wouldn't challenge the order. That image became my shield. I took a regular job, nothing flashy, something stable enough to look ordinary. But every night, when the house went quiet, I worked on myself. I studied how systems work, how money moves, how power hides behind polite words. I learned something important during those years. Family betrayal isn't emotional, it's strategic. They didn't hurt me by accident. They calculated it. So I decided my response would be calculated too. I stopped thinking like a hurt boy and started thinking like a patient man. I began building connections outside the family, people who didn't know my last name, people who judged me only by my work. For the first time in my life, I felt respected without conditions, and that changed everything. While my relatives fought among themselves for attention, I stayed invisible. I listened at family gatherings. I remembered conversations no one else cared about. Who trusted who feared exposure, who was cutting corners. Everyone leaves fingerprints behind. They just don't expect anyone to collect them. I wasn't planning revenge in the dramatic way people imagine. There were no angry speeches in front of mirrors, no promises whispered into the dark. My plan was simpler. I would let them destroy themselves. All I had to do was be ready. When the moment arrived, and it did. One year, a major opportunity came again. Bigger than the last one. More money, more visibility. The family was divided this time. Egos clashing, trust breaking. They needed someone neutral, someone safe. They needed me. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I didn't rush. I didn't show excitement. I hesitated, and hesitation made them trust me more. I agreed to help, quietly. They thought they were using me again. What they didn't know was that I had already outgrown them. Every document I touched, I understood deeply. Every decision I analyzed twice. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply observing. Truth has a strange way of surfacing when you stop covering it up. And slowly, cracks began to show. Numbers didn't add up. Promises were broken. Stories didn't match. They blamed outsiders. They blamed timing. They blamed bad luck. They never blamed themselves. And they never suspected me, because in their minds, I was still the boy who lost. But here's the thing about being underestimated. You get to watch people make mistakes without trying to stop them. I didn't expose anything yet. That would have been too soon. Revenge rushed is revenge wasted. Instead, I waited until they were confident, until they were proud, until they believed nothing could touch them. Only then does truth hit hardest, and I was holding all of it. There is a moment in every long betrayal when lies begin to get heavy. You can see it in the eyes, in the pauses between words, in the way people repeat themselves, hoping the story will stay true. That's when I knew the time was getting close. At first, nothing exploded. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. The truth didn't crash in, it leaked. Small things began to go wrong. A deal delayed, a payment questioned, a partner asking uncomfortable questions. They called emergency family meetings. Voices got louder. Smiles disappeared. I sat there quietly, the same way I always had, and that scared them. Because silence this time wasn't submission, it was confidence. They started blaming each other. Old grudges resurfaced. Past arguments returned with new meaning. What amazed me most was how fast loyalty vanished. When pressure arrived, the same people who once spoke about family first now protected only themselves. I didn't push them. I didn't need to. I simply answered questions, honestly, and honesty was more dangerous to them than any lie. When someone asked me about numbers, I showed the real ones. When someone asked about promises, I reminded them what was actually said. No accusations, no emotions, just facts, and facts have no favorites. Slowly, people outside the family began to notice patterns. Mistakes repeated, rules bent, excuses recycled. The respect they once had started to fade. Inside the family, panic grew. I saw it in how they avoided eye contact with me, in how conversations stopped when I entered the room. They were starting to realize something. The boy they underestimated was the only one who knew everything. One night, my uncle pulled me aside. He tried to sound calm, friendly. He asked me what I thought. I looked at him and said the truth. I think the truth always finds its way out. His face changed. Not anger, fear. That was the moment I knew. They understood too late. Still, I didn't reveal everything, because exposure works best when people believe they still have time. They tried to fix things quietly, hide mistakes, rewrite stories. But the damage was already done. Trust, once cracked, never fully heals. Partners began stepping back, support weakened, authority slipped, and the family that once stood united against me was now divided against itself. I didn't celebrate. I felt something else, relief. Because justice isn't about watching others fall. It's about finally being seen. For the first time, my words mattered. Not because of my name, not because of family ties, but because I was right, and the truth was finally louder than their voices. But the final moment was still coming, and when it arrived, there would be no way to escape it. The day everything came out didn't begin with drama. It began quietly, like any other morning. That's how truth works. It doesn't warn you, it just arrives. I remember walking into that room and feeling a strange calm, the kind of calm you feel when you already know the ending. Everyone was there, family members, business partners, people who once believed in the image we sold. No one was smiling. They were nervous. You could hear it in the silence. The meeting was supposed to be routine. A simple review, a few clarifications. That's what they thought. The first questions were polite, then specific, then sharp. Numbers were projected, dates were checked, promises were repeated, and slowly, the stories stopped matching. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. Every time someone tried to explain, another fact surfaced. Every excuse met evidence. And then, someone asked me directly, "Johnson, can you explain this?" That was the moment. I stood up, not in anger, not in pride, in clarity. I spoke calmly. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply told the story, the way it actually happened. Who knew what, who approved what, who benefited. No raised voice, no blame, just truth. And truth is heavy when it has been ignored for too long. I watched faces change. Confusion turned into shock. Shock turned into silence. Some tried to interrupt me. Others avoided looking up. They knew. They had always known. They just didn't expect the truth to come from me. When I finished, the room felt smaller. The authority they once held was gone. Not taken by force, exposed by facts. One by one, people outside the family began asking hard questions, not emotional ones, legal ones, professional ones. And that's when panic hit. They tried to speak, to explain, to soften the impact. But explanations don't work when trust is broken. The meeting ended early. No shouting, no chaos, just quiet understanding, the kind that changes everything. That night, I went home and sat alone in the dark. I didn't feel victory. I felt release. Because revenge wasn't what I wanted. I wanted my story back, and I had it. But there was still something left, the aftermath. Because exposure doesn't end a story. It begins a new one. After the truth came out, everything slowed down. Not in the way movies show. There were no dramatic exits, no shouting in the streets, just distance. Phone calls stopped, meetings were canceled. Names that once carried weight suddenly meant nothing. That's how power really disappears, quietly. I watched from the outside as the family tried to hold itself together. They told themselves it was temporary, that things would return to normal, but normal was gone. People who once defended them now asked questions. Support became hesitation. Respect turned into caution. Inside the family, the damage was deeper. Conversations were tense. Trust was broken beyond repair. They looked at each other, the way they once looked at me, with doubt. Some blamed me. Others avoided me. A few finally understood. One cousin came to me late one night. He didn't apologize. He didn't defend himself either. He just said, "I didn't know it was this bad." That sentence stayed with me because it proved something important. Betrayal doesn't always come from evil. Sometimes it comes from silence, from people choosing comfort over truth. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger needs an enemy, and I no longer saw enemies, just consequences. The family business shrank, influence faded, doors closed, not because of revenge, because of reality. Meanwhile, my life felt lighter. For the first time, I wasn't carrying a story that wasn't mine. I didn't need approval. I didn't need recognition. I had proof. And proof changes how you see yourself. I walked differently, spoke differently, not louder, clearer. Some family members never spoke to me again. Others tried to reconnect. When they realized I was no longer beneath them, I didn't reject anyone, but I didn't chase anyone either. Because healing doesn't mean going back. It means moving forward without bitterness. Still, there was one thing left: closure. Not for them, for me. There are moments in life that don't feel important when they happen, but later you realize they changed everything. This was one of those moments. It didn't happen in a big room. There were no witnesses, no raised voices, just two chairs, a quiet evening, and years of silence finally asking to be heard. After everything fell apart, after the truth was exposed, after the family power faded, I thought I was done. I thought closure would come automatically once justice showed up. But it didn't, because even when betrayal ends, questions remain. And unanswered questions can haunt you longer than pain. For weeks, I avoided family gatherings, not out of fear, out of exhaustion. I had spent my whole life trying to be seen by people who chose not to look. I didn't want to go backward. Then one night, I got a message. It wasn't long, it wasn't emotional, just a simple line, "Can we talk?" It was from my father, and suddenly, the calm I had built inside myself began to shake. Because no matter how strong you become, there are some voices that still reach the child inside you. I didn't reply immediately. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part wanted to scream, and a quiet part wanted answers, not accusations, answers. I agreed. We met at a place we used to visit when I was younger, a small cafe near the road. Nothing fancy. The kind of place where time seems slower. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting alone, older than I remembered, tired in a way I'd never seen before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me and said my name, not as a command, not as authority, as a father, and that broke something inside me. He didn't start with excuses. He didn't defend anyone. He said something I never expected to hear. I failed you, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. And honesty, when you've been denied it your whole life, hits harder than anger. He told me things I was never supposed to know, about pressure, about fear, about choosing peace over fairness, about how standing up for me would have meant standing alone, and how he chose not to. I listened, not to forgive immediately, but to understand, because understanding is the last step before freedom. He admitted he saw the injustice. He admitted he stayed quiet, not because he believed it was right, but because he believed resistance was pointless. And suddenly, the picture became clearer. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was generational. A system built on silence, on avoiding conflict, on sacrificing one person to protect the group. And I was that person. He asked me if I hated him. I didn't answer right away, because hate requires energy, and I was tired. Instead, I said something else. I needed you. Not then, not now. Always. And for the first time, he didn't look away. That conversation didn't fix the past. It didn't erase the pain. But it did something more important. It released me from the question I carried my whole life. Was it my fault? And the answer was finally clear. No, it never was. We talked for hours, not arguing, not blaming, just speaking truths that were delayed by years. When we stood up to leave, there was no hug, just a nod, respect, not the kind you demand, the kind you earn. As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Light, not happiness, not victory, peace. Because revenge may expose others, but closure saves you. And in that moment, I understood something powerful. The goal was never to destroy my family. The goal was to stop being destroyed by them. That conversation didn't end the story, but it changed how the story lived inside me. And that changed everything. After everything collapsed, after the truth came out, after the family name stopped opening doors, I expected to feel lost. That's what people say happens when your old world ends. They say you feel empty, confused, afraid. But what I felt was something else, space. For the first time in my life, there was space around me. No expectations to carry, no roles to perform, no silent comparisons hanging in the air. Just me and silence. At first, the silence felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Because when you grow up surrounded by tension, quiet feels unfamiliar. But slowly, that quiet became my foundation. I realized something important during those first few months. I had spent most of my life reacting, responding to decisions made by others, adjusting myself to survive inside their system. Now, for the first time, I could choose, not what they expected, not what would keep peace, what I wanted. I moved away, not far, just far enough to breathe, a small place, nothing impressive, but it was mine. Every morning I woke up without fear of judgment, without waiting for approval, without checking where I stood in someone else's hierarchy. I started with simple routines, walking, reading, thinking. It sounds small, but small routines rebuild broken minds. I thought a lot about who I was before the betrayal, and then I realized something painful. I didn't know. My identity had always been shaped by resistance, by trying to prove myself, by surviving unfairness. Now that the fight was over, I had to learn who Johnson was, without opposition. That was harder than any betrayal, because when pain leaves, it leaves questions behind. I asked myself things I had never asked before. What do I enjoy when no one is watching? What kind of life feels honest to me? What does success mean when it's not about revenge? The answers didn't come quickly. Some days I felt strong. Other days I felt empty again. Healing isn't a straight line, but I kept moving. I went back to learning, not to impress anyone, but because curiosity returned. I studied systems again, but this time not to defend myself, to build. I started working with people who didn't know my past, and that mattered more than I expected. When no one knows your story, they only judge your work. And my work spoke clearly. I made mistakes, small ones, safe ones, mistakes without punishment. That alone felt like freedom. Slowly, opportunities came, not because of family names, not because of connections, because of consistency. And consistency builds trust, stronger than reputation ever does. I didn't chase money aggressively. I focused on stability first, because after chaos, stability feels like luxury. As months turned into years, I began to see something beautiful. The same traits that made me invisible before were now my strengths. Patience, observation, silence. I listened deeply. I noticed patterns others missed, and people noticed that. I was invited into rooms where voices were calm, where disagreements were handled with respect. No shouting, no fear. I realized then how unhealthy my old environment had been, and how normal life could actually feel. There were moments when the past returned, a family name mentioned casually, an old photo resurfacing. Sometimes anger tried to come back, but it didn't stay, because anger needs something unresolved, and I had resolved mine. I didn't forget what happened, but I stopped living inside it. That's the difference between memory and trauma. One evening after a long day, I sat alone again, but this time, the silence felt warm. I looked around my small place, the books on the shelf, the notes on my desk, and I understood something deeply. I had built this life without destroying anyone, without humiliating anyone publicly, without becoming the person who hurt me. And that felt like the greatest victory of all. Success, I learned, is not about standing on ruins. It's about standing on ground. You prepared yourself. I didn't become famous. I didn't become powerful in the old sense. But I became stable. I became respected. And most importantly, I became whole. There was one moment that sealed everything for me. I was mentoring someone younger, a quiet kid, overlooked. I saw myself in him. He asked me a question that froze me. How do you deal with people who don't see your value? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said the truth. You stop asking them to. That sentence came from pain, but also from growth. And in that moment, I realized my story wasn't just about revenge. It was about transformation, about breaking a cycle. The family never fully recovered. Some relationships were repaired partially. Others ended permanently. And that was okay, because not every door is meant to be reopened. I learned to forgive without forgetting, to respect without returning, and to love without depending. I stopped defining my life by what was taken from me. I defined it by what I built afterward. And that changed everything. If you're listening to this story, there's a reason. Stories like mine don't survive because they are dramatic. They survive because they are familiar. Somewhere inside you, a moment probably just surfaced. A time you trusted someone who didn't protect you. A time you stayed quiet because speaking up felt dangerous. That's where this final chapter begins. Not with my family, not with revenge, but with understanding. For a long time, I believed betrayal was a single moment, a decision, a meeting, a name crossed out. But that's not how betrayal really works. Betrayal is a process. It starts when your voice is ignored, when your effort is minimized, when your pain is explained away as inconvenience. Most betrayals don't come with shouting. They come with silence. And silence, repeated long enough, teaches you a lie. It teaches you that your worth depends on permission. I believed that lie for years. I believed that if I just waited longer, worked harder, proved myself more clearly, someone would finally stand up and say, "He matters." But here is the hardest truth I learned. No one is coming to save you from a system that benefits from your silence. That doesn't make people evil. It makes them comfortable. And comfort is powerful. People protect what keeps them comfortable, even if it hurts someone else, especially if that someone else has learned not to fight back. I don't tell this story to turn pain into drama. I tell it because too many people think betrayal only counts when it's loud, but the quiet betrayals do the deepest damage. The ones where you are overlooked, replaced politely, excluded gently, where no one can point to a single villain, but you still end up broken. That kind of betrayal confuses you. It makes you question your memory, your judgment, your value. It makes you ask, am I overreacting? I asked myself that question for most of my life, until I stopped. The moment I stopped questioning myself, everything changed. That's the lesson I want to leave behind. Not about revenge, about clarity. Clarity is dangerous to systems built on silence. Once you clearly see how you are treated, you can never unsee it. And once you see it, you have a choice. You can stay and slowly disappear, or you can leave and rebuild. Leaving doesn't always mean walking away physically. Sometimes it means emotionally stepping out of roles that shrink you. Sometimes it means no longer explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. I used to think leaving meant losing. Now I know, staying where you are diminished is the real loss. Another truth I learned late, but wish I had learned early: being patient is not the same as being passive. Patience is powerful when it serves your growth, but when patience is used to tolerate disrespect, it becomes self-betrayal. And self-betrayal hurts more than anything others can do to you. I betrayed myself every time I stayed quiet to keep peace, every time I accepted unfairness to avoid conflict, every time I told myself, this is just how families are. Families are not supposed to erase you. Workplaces are not supposed to silence you. Love is not supposed to require invisibility. If it does, it's not love, it's control. Another lesson I carry with me is this: you don't need to expose everyone to heal yourself. Exposure feels powerful, but it's temporary. What lasts is the life you build afterward. I didn't win because my family lost. I won because I stopped living inside their version of me. That distinction matters, because if your healing depends on someone else's downfall, you're still tied to them. Freedom begins when your peace no longer requires their pain. That doesn't mean forgiving everything. It means choosing yourself first. I didn't forgive to make them feel better. I forgave to stop carrying their weight. And forgiveness didn't come as a feeling. It came as a decision to no longer let old wounds dictate new choices. Another truth: closure doesn't always come from apologies. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. Accepting that some people will never admit they were wrong. Accepting that some systems will never change. Accepting that fairness is not guaranteed. And still choosing to live fully. That is strength. Not loud strength, quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need approval. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: your value does not increase when others recognize it. Your value is constant. Recognition only changes who benefits from it. Once you understand that, you stop chasing validation and start building alignment. Alignment between who you are and how you live. That alignment is rare and powerful. It turns pain into wisdom, silence into insight, loss into direction. This story isn't about a boy who was betrayed. It's about a man who refused to disappear. And if you're listening right now, still holding on to something unfair, maybe it's time to stop asking for permission, to matter. If you've stayed with this story until now, I want to speak to you directly. Not as a narrator, not as a character, as someone who knows what it feels like to be overlooked, dismissed, and quietly replaced. Because stories like mine don't pull people in unless something inside them already recognizes the pain. So let me tell you what I wish someone had told me when I was still trying to earn my place. First, pay attention to patterns, not promises. People can promise you respect, support, and fairness. But patterns never lie. If you are always the one adjusting, always the one waiting, always the one being told later, that's not bad timing. That's a pattern. And patterns are choices. When people show you repeatedly that your needs come second, believe them the first time. Not because they are evil, but because they are honest about their priorities. Second, stop explaining your pain to people who benefit from it. This one took me years to learn. I thought if I just explained myself better, used calmer words, chose the right moment, they would finally understand. But some people don't misunderstand you. They understand you perfectly and still choose themselves. Explaining your pain to them only teaches them where you are vulnerable. Silence, used wisely, protects your energy. Not every truth needs to be spoken to every audience. Third, being the good one can quietly destroy you. I was proud of being patient, of being reasonable, of being the one who didn't cause trouble. But I didn't realize I was paying for peace with pieces of myself. Being good is not the same as being invisible. If your goodness requires you to accept unfairness without question, then goodness has become a cage. You are allowed to be kind and still draw boundaries. You are allowed to be respectful and still say no. Fourth, anger is not your enemy. Uncontrolled anger is. For a long time, I was afraid of my anger. I thought feeling angry meant I was becoming like them. But anger is just information. It tells you something matters, something crossed a line, something needs attention. The problem is not anger. The problem is letting anger choose your actions. When you listen to anger, without obeying it, it becomes wisdom. When you ignore anger, it becomes bitterness. Neither extreme is healthy. Balance is power. Fifth, you don't need to expose everyone to heal. I know exposure feels tempting. It feels like justice. And sometimes it is necessary. But healing that depends on humiliation is fragile. The strongest healing comes when your life improves so much that the past loses its grip on you. When your present is full, the past becomes quiet. Sixth, leaving doesn't always look like leaving. Sometimes you can't walk away because of family, because of money, because of responsibility. But you can leave emotionally. You can stop sharing your dreams with people who mock them. You can stop seeking advice from people who don't want you to grow. You can stop waiting for permission to become yourself. That kind of leaving changes everything. Seventh, your worth is not negotiable. It doesn't increase. When someone praises you, it doesn't decrease. When someone ignores you, if someone treats your worth as conditional, that tells you everything you need to know. Don't negotiate your value with people who profit from lowering it. Eighth, not everyone will clap when you rise. Some people loved you when you were quiet, useful, and small. They will feel threatened when you become confident, independent, and clear. That doesn't mean you are wrong. It means the dynamic has changed. And not everyone survives change. That's okay. Ninth, healing will feel lonely before it feels peaceful. There will be moments when you wonder if staying would have been easier. Moments when the familiar pain feels safer than the unknown future. That doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you are growing. Growth always costs familiarity. 10th, you don't owe anyone access to the new you. Some people knew you when you were struggling. That does not give them a lifetime pass to your life. Access is earned through respect, not history. And finally, you don't need to become harder to become stronger. I thought strength meant closing my heart, becoming cold, never trusting again. But real strength is choosing softness without losing boundaries. It's trusting again, but trusting wisely. It's staying open without staying unprotected. If I could go back and speak to the boy I was, I would tell him this: you don't need to disappear to belong, and you don't need revenge to reclaim your life. Just don't abandon yourself. Because the moment you stop abandoning yourself, everything else begins to realign. And if this story reached you at a moment when you're doubting your worth, let it remind you, you are not asking for too much. You are just asking the wrong people. There's something I understand now that took me most of my life to learn. Every story leaves a legacy, even the painful ones. Not the kind of legacy written in names or money, but the kind written quietly in how a person chooses to live afterward. For a long time, I thought my legacy would be revenge, that people would remember me as the one who exposed everything, the one who brought truth into the light. But that version of legacy still kept me tied to the past, and I didn't want my future to be shaped by what hurt me. I wanted it shaped by what I chose next. So this is the legacy I choose to leave: that you don't have to become cruel to prove you were wronged, that you don't have to destroy others to rebuild yourself, that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers and still changes everything. I think about the people who will hear this story years from now, people who may never know my family, never know the details, never know the names, but they will know the feeling, that quiet moment when you realize you've been shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort, that moment when you feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, that moment when you ask yourself, is this all I'm allowed to be? If this story reaches you in that moment, then it has done its job, because here is the truth. No one tells you loudly enough. You are allowed to outgrow the places that hurt you, even if they are called family, even if they are called home, even if leaving them changes how people see you. Your life is not a group project. You don't need consensus to choose yourself. Another truth I carry now: some people will never apologize. They will rewrite the past, minimize it, or pretend it never happened. Waiting for their apology keeps you emotionally dependent. Freedom comes when you stop needing their agreement to move on. I didn't get apologies from everyone, and for a long time, that bothered me, until I realized an apology is only powerful if it changes behavior. Anything else is just words, and words without action are empty. What mattered more was how I showed up for myself afterward, how I spoke to myself when old doubts tried to return, how I protected my peace when familiar chaos tried to pull me back, how I chose relationships that felt calm instead of intense, because peace is not boring. Peace is what safety feels like. After a lifetime of tension, I used to think love had to hurt to be real, that loyalty meant sacrifice, that belonging required silence. I was wrong. Real love does not ask you to disappear. Real loyalty does not demand your dignity. Real belonging does not require you to shrink. And once you experience that kind of life, you can never go back. Sometimes people ask me if I would change anything. If I could go back, would I speak sooner? Would I fight harder? The honest answer is complicated. Pain shaped me. Silence taught me patience. Betrayal taught me clarity. I don't romanticize what happened, but I don't erase it either, because without that journey, I wouldn't understand how strong, quiet resilience can be. I wouldn't understand that dignity doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from living in alignment with your values. I wouldn't understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away without explanation. Not because you are weak, but because you are done explaining to people who never listened. So if this is the end of the story, let it end like this. Not with revenge, with choice. The choice to stop proving, the choice to stop chasing, the choice to stop shrinking, the choice to live fully. Even when the past tries to pull you back, you don't need to be louder to be heard. You don't need to be harder to be respected. And you don't need to carry what was never yours to begin with. My name is Johnson. I was once the boy who was quietly pushed aside, and I became the man who chose peace over permission. If you remember anything from my story, remember this: you are not weak for feeling hurt. You are not wrong for wanting fairness, and you are not selfish for choosing yourself. The world may never validate your pain, but you don't need it to. Your life is waiting, and it doesn't require anyone's approval to begin. This is where my story ends, and where yours continues.